You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's story involving a member of the U.S. Coast Guard, and our first story here on the Hazard Ground, after all these years and all these episodes, our first story of solely somebody who spent their entire military career in the Coast Guard. So we're going to learn a lot together here. But first, a few of our normal announcements. Please give us a follow on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast as well. Please continue to leave us Apple reviews, 5-star ratings as well. Wherever you get these podcasts, particularly on Apple, give us a 5-star rating. Tell us why you love the show. We certainly appreciate all the great comments that we've gotten. We've even got some comments from listeners overseas, Australia, places abroad. I mean, we certainly know that this Hazard Ground community is worldwide. We appreciate all the love and support, but those 5-star reviews help us out a ton, so please continue to leave them. Don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. As always, go to our website, hazardground.com. You can click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or on the sponsors tab. It'll redirect you to Amazon. You do all of your normal Amazon shopping. We get a percentage of what you guys spend, and then we donate a percentage of that back to some of the great charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the show. So we certainly appreciate all the love and support. All right, this week's guest, folks, again, spent 10 years in the U.S. Coast Guard, ended it as a MK3, a Machinist Technician, 3rd class was the rank that it is. And after 10 years, he had multiple different, we don't call it, it's not deployments with the Coast Guard because they're not combat oriented, but we're talking about different things between drug busts and different, ventures out to sea, life-saving of people on the water, things of that nature. So we're going to hear this entire story from our next guest, Jim Morphew, as he joins us here on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Jim, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate this.
I mean, listen, and full disclosure to the audience, guys, I'm smart, but I know very little about the Coast Guard. It's one of those things that a lot of us don't, right? I know the Coast Guard gets a lot of guff and we make fun of it, and, it's not a military branch per se, even though it is, but just because, and it's actually the second oldest one behind the Army, for those who don't know. So the Coast Guard's been around second longest. It was there before the Navy and the Air Force and the Marine Corps and everything else, but we're gonna do this together, Jim. We're gonna learn. You're gonna teach our audience a lot about the Coast Guard, and again, because it's not combat oriented, it's just a different mission set. No less dangerous, certainly no less, for lack of a better term, I guess, exciting about the work that you guys do. But we're gonna learn it all together. So, how and why does the Coast Guard career begin for you?
I was wasting my parents' money going to the University of Texas, El Paso after we returned from Germany. My father was in the Army. I saw a commercial at 11:30 at night right before they used to turn off the TV and put the test pattern on, and it said U.S. Coast Guard. And I saw a picture of a 44-foot motor lifeboat, which was crossing the bar, which is a large sea going out like one of the inland Oregon coastlet inlets or something like that. What they are is they're a special vessel that will go run through the sea, and if it turns over, it will right itself and save the crew. Once I saw that, I knew I had to ride one of those.
Now, you also had a family member who served in the Coast Guard, correct?
I've got 14 family members that served directly in 14 members that served in the service, and one family member that served in World War II with the Coast Guard. He was a Higgins boat driver that used to let the guys off on the beaches.
Okay. So when you join the Coast Guard, do you know exactly what you're getting into? Like, are you well aware of the mission and everything else other than being on a cool plane? Did you have any idea what you were getting into?
Absolutely not. I was really thinking about taking the test for Customs and Border Patrol, but then I knew I'd be stationed right there at Fort Bliss or right there in El Paso, and I was still itching, wanting to travel. I've been traveling all my life. Spent 2 tours in Germany, graduated from high school in Germany, lived in the boys' dormitory at the high school. So I've been around. I like to travel.
You have to go off to boot camp, obviously.
Yes.
You know, well, let me back up for a second before we go to boot camp. When you met with
Sure.
the recruiter, what did they tell you about the Coast Guard?
And I don't remember much about that. I remember going in, taking the test, him being happy, and receiving a letter a couple of days later saying, "Hey, you're in the Coast Guard. Congratulations." I was one of 300 chosen out of that district that year.
All right, so you get into the Coast Guard. Now, when you head off to boot camp, was there a way to study about what you were walking into? Is it the same as all the military boot camps? I don't even know.
Well, it's structured the same.
Okay.
My boot camp was in Alameda, California, which at the time there was two boot camps, one in East Coast up in Cape May, New Jersey, and one on the West Coast out at Alameda. I was a West Coast person, so being in El Paso, and they sent me out to Alameda, California. Boot camp is probably just like about anybody else's boot camp. You get off the bus, you stand on the squares, and they yell and scream at you forever.
Do they just throw you in the water and say, "Hey, see if you can swim," kind of deal?
Well, that's kind of funny that you say that. Yeah, once you get into the swimming phase, they basically say, "Hey, get in the water. If you don't know how to swim, we're going to teach you." But luckily for me, I'd been in swimming lessons since about the age of 6 and swim team and all that. So I was ready to go as far as the swimming went.
All right. So when do you graduate from boot camp? Like month, year, time frame? What are we talking here?
That should be around April 78.
All right. So 1978. So, I mean, we're not necessarily,
Yeah.
I mean, and just, on the periphery, we're not engaged in combat at this point in time.
Oh,
So,
no. No.
Because one of the things I was curious about is when there are combat missions, how much the Coast Guard is either ancillary to it or providing some level of support and things of that nature. We can discuss a little bit more of that, as we go along here. But
Sure.
you get to your first duty station in Station Grand Isle in Louisiana, correct?
Yes, sir. I was told by the company commander when we got our orders that day, he said, "Do you like sun, sand, and beer and women?" I said, "I love them." He said, "Well, there's sand, sun, and tree or woman behind every tree." I got to Grand Isle, Louisiana, and there's not a tree one. It's 7 Mile Island by 3/4 wide with a 24-man station.
Now, what is your actual job when you get to your first duty station? Are you a machinist tech at that point in time?
No, the Coast Guard's a little different. Once you go into the Coast Guard, you're a non-rate, E2 or E3. You're going to have about 2 years of duty as a non-rate to learn all the ropes, to learn how to be a seaman, to learn how to be a junior engineer or whatever your job is. It's learning the small boats, learning how to be a small boat crewman, or on the big boats to be a big boat crewman. I got lucky and chose a small boat unit.
Now, you talk about the learning the ropes, so to speak. I know that like the Army has, their advanced individual training, or the School of Infantry for the Marine. Like, is there anything like that in the Coast Guard as well, where you sort of get a specialty?
Well, yeah, after it took me about a year and 8 months before I went off to, I guess you would call MOS school,
Right.
which would be Machinery Technician School,
Okay.
which is in Yorktown,
So
Virginia.
you get to your unit first. You spend your year or two there, like you said, learning the ropes. Then they send you to your MOS
Absolutely.
producing school. Okay.
There's a lot to learn after boot camp. Instead of just sending you right into an A school, they need you to be able to know the fundamentals of boat handling and being a seaman or an engineer or something like that. You have to learn how to tie. You have to learn how to, there's just so many multiple aspects of the Coast Guard or a service member's job when they're in the Coast Guard. There's certain things they have to learn before they ever go off to actual training.
So what happens at Grand Isle? You experience your first mission of a person in the water. Is that my understanding?
My very first SAR case was kind of a hazing thing, but
Now, when you say SAR case, explain what that is.
search and rescue.
Search and rescue. Okay, SAR is search and
Search
rescue.
and
Got it.
rescue.
Okay.
I had a young female that was in the water, had been in the water for, I don't know, several weeks, and she was pretty tore up. And when we got there, I was the one that entered the water and put her in the Stokes litter. and put her back up on the boat. That was quite, I was 21, just turned 21, but that was quite a shock to me. And it worked. I made it work. They taught me how to deal with it afterwards, which was go to the local bar and drink.
Oh, okay. I mean, you said she was out there for a while. Like, how long was a while? How long did she survive out on the water?
I don't think she survived. I think the undertow had got her and dragged her down the beach for several miles. And usually, if you get into an undertow, all you do is just relax your body, float, and it will return you to the beach. It's when you start fighting that undertow, it's when you'll wear yourself out and drown.
Oh, so she had already expired by the time you
Yeah,
got to
she'd
her.
already expired. She'd been in the water for about 2 weeks, and
Oh God, wow.
it's not pretty when they're in salt water like that.
I was going to say, no wonder why you had to go to the bar and drink.
Yeah, it was quite a learning experience,
Did
but
did you?
I learned quick.
I was going to say, did you
Learned
think that
real
you had made a
quick.
mistake after that experience? Did you think that this
No,
wasn't for you?
no. Then I realized that hey, this is something that's got to be done, and I don't know. I just felt like returning her to her parents were a good thing.
Right. Okay. So, and that was before you went to your machinist tech school that happened.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
oh yeah, yeah. I had several other cases that I think I've mentioned to you. One of them is the
Hmm.
Flying Fish 2, which was a charter boat fishing boat out of Fourchon, Louisiana, was sinking in the jetties. It was a real rough night. They had 22 people on board. So we sent two 41-foot patrol boats or 41-foot utility boats to go take care of the situation. We managed to get at 2:30 in the morning, managed to get all 22 of those people up out of the water. The boat sank, but we got all of them.
All right. So we move on from there. After you
Okay.
finish your school, you then get transferred to another. Is it another duty station or just another part uh, of of Grand Isle? Sorry.
Well, the funny part about that is while I was in Grand Isle, there was an 82-foot patrol boat, which is a 10-man crew that's also stationed there. Her name is the Coast Guard Cutter Point Sal. I kept looking at that boat and I wanted to be on that boat. They did more of the law enforcement and long range search and rescue. So I transferred from the station to the 82 to the Point Spencer and got orders for A school once I was on the 82. Went to A school. A school finished up, and they decided they were going to send me right back to Grand Isle because it was such an isolated duty station. And I had been there before and seemed to like the place. So I went back to Station Grand Isle. I stayed at Station Grand Isle till right at 1980, I think it was. And the Point Spencer, which is an 82 footer that was up in New Orleans, had had a need for my rate, my MOS, and they liked me on the law enforcement aspect, and they asked me if I'd be a part of the crew. So they sent me to New Orleans, and I spent probably the busiest time of my life in New Orleans for 2 years on the Point Spencer.
Okay. So we before we get to Point Spencer, I want to back up a little bit because you had a couple of major
Sure,
incidents that
sure.
you went through. You found some frozen dead shrimpers, which again
Oh,
sounds awful.
that was pretty wild. This was on the Point Sal. So we had gotten a call from a helicopter that was a petroleum helicopter. That's the helos that run the guys out to the oil rigs.
Hmm.
Well, he had noticed a shrimp boat on a couple of trips that it was doing circles, big circles out there, and it was still in the same position. And he noticed a man that was dead on deck, or he noticed what was a body that was on deck. So we got out there as quickly as we could. The boarding team, which I was part of, we jumped on the boat, noticed the captain of the boat was halfway in and outside the captain or the cabin, the steering house, and he was dead. And noticed a gentleman back on by the shrimp hole was dead. Well, this vessel had an ammonia making ice making machine, and one of the lines feeding this machine ruptured, and I guess it killed the whole crew because there was three other crew members that were in the bottom of the shrimp boat down in the ice hole that were frozen. So we had to figure out how to get them out of there, and that was not fun.
Oh, so take me through. You see this thing on the water. Are they? Forgive my naivete. Like in the movie,
It's all right.
in the movie The Guardian, like you're flying on a Black Hawk and they lower you down and you get on the vessel and you go in there and grab them and send them up in the little crate. I mean, is that as simple, I guess, as it is?
That's the ocean. That's the aviation side of it.
Okay.
I was on the boat side of it.
So you go up you pull up on a boat then.
There's 4 of us that go up on the boat.
Okay.
So that's a boarding team. Boarding team's 4 members.
Now, is it safe to assume like this is not like turbulent waters that you're going in, or is this like, you're fighting storms and everything else on the boat along to go get to another boat?
This was an easy one. It was flat ass calm out there. It was a nice, beautiful day.
But it was cold, obviously.
I don't really think so. No,
because you said they were frozen.
Or summertime. Well, yeah, they were in the ice hole.
Okay.
They were inside the ice hole where the shrimp were sold. So they had all 3 of them had fallen down in that ice hole. It's like a big freezer.
Wow. Okay.
So they managed to freeze in a few hours.
You pull up next to it, then you hop on, you get them off, and you move on. That simple?
Right. We get on there, we get them off, we get them on, get them back to the base, and let the corners come in and take care of them.
Is there part of you that's looking at this going, how do these people end up like this? Like why didn't they call for help? What goes wrong? Like, I mean, because I'm just kind of genuinely curious. I mean, obviously there's an industry for shrimping that, aside from Forrest Gump handling it all, there is an industry for shrimping that, people do. But I mean, did you think that this was a deadly operation? Like that you were going to be dealing with so much sort of death?
You never know. You never know. It's one of those things that you just walk into. How did we get the call? Well, we got the call from a helicopter. And everybody that lives around a coastal city that has Coast Guard units know that Coast Guard are considered the coasties of the sea. We're the law enforcement search and rescue agency responsible for all laws and navigation within the ports of New York or within the ports of the United States, continental United States. So they just automatically call us. That's like calling 911.
All right, that's simple. You mentioned that you guys are the police of the sea, so to speak. So
yes, absolutely.
One of the other things that people may or may not know that one thing I do know that the Coast Guard does is a lot of drug busts. You come across your first drug bust experience.
My first drug bust was a small shrimp boat that was out of South America somewhere. We're not real sure where she came out of. And she had about 10 people on board. We came up across her in the middle of the night, and they were throwing the bales of weed off the stern. Well, they didn't realize at the time all we had to do is just take one bale, and that was evidence. So we grabbed one bale, and we waited for them to run out of fuel. We jumped on board the rest of the crew and brought them back. So that was a real nice, easy. I got my first bust, and the bug bit me.
Were you surprised that there were drugs being dealt on the water?
Well, I knew there were smugglers from the history, and I knew that the Coast Guard was real active during Prohibition, during the chasing the whiskey runners and the rum runners. So it was only natural for a Coast Guard guy to be out there chasing drug smugglers.
All right, so
does that make sense?
Yeah, when you say you got bit by the bug, like, is this now the thing that you want to do the most? Is find bad guys trying to smuggle drugs? Like, is this the most fun thing you're doing?
Search and rescue was my priority. Okay. Because of lives.
Right.
Drug bust was, let's go get them. That's our job. Let's go get them. And they kind of trained us up like a bunch of chained up pit bulls. We were ready for whatever they had to do what we had to do. That bust was real
interesting
in formulating my career. It really kind of got me started on what I wanted to really do.
How so, and what was it that you wanted to do?
Well, I wanted to continue with the search and rescue and the law enforcement. So that's why I went ahead and took once I got a chance to get on the Point Spencer. The Point Spencer was considered the prize crew of the 8th District. 8th District is Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and just a little bit of Alabama. She handled the whole Gulf of Mexico. And anytime another 82 82 unit that was out of service for maintenance or anything like that in the Gulf of Mexico, we went and took her place. So we were underway a lot. There was no home time at all with that unit. For 2 years, I spent mostly out of New Orleans. She was a fast boat. She was stationed in what we like to call Sweetwater, which was fresh water, so she didn't have any buildup on the hull, and she was a real good running boat. I really enjoyed that time on that boat. Had an excellent crew, numerous SARS. Just, I think we probably need to go into some of the stuff that I had listed there on the big cases, because that unit was just, there were so many cases I can't remember them all.
Right. Before you go to A school, go ahead.
Go ahead. Before I went to A school.
Yeah, before you went to A school, which is the school we talked about before, where you learn your sort of
Right.
your MOS proficiency.
Right.
You end up, what you said was taking a dip. I mean, I assume that you end up in the water at some point, but this was not on purpose.
Yeah, I'd forgotten, but I wrote you about that. Yeah, we took a dip. The Chief MK and I were dewatering a offshore supply vessel, which was a 160-foot boat, and it decided to turtle. When we say it turtled, it capsized.
Okay.
We were on that boat. It was in the middle of the night. It was January. We were freezing. The old man on the boat, our CO, was a Master Chief, which was an E9. And it's quite common to have an E9 as a commanding officer of those boats. He had about 28 years of service, Vietnam vet, and he went absolutely bonkers. He didn't want his guys in the water. So he did everything he could to get us out of the water that night as fast as he did. And we were lucky not to go hypothermic, because it was quite cold that night. Got us back to the station, and they sent us off to the hospital to get checked out and all that. We managed to lose the boat, but we gave it a heck of a shot.
Did you think you were going to die?
No. I never worried about dying.
Did you think you were going to freeze out on that water, though?
No. I knew my crew was right there.
I mean,
when you're with a 10-man crew, or even a 4-man crew on a 41-footer, you know these guys like the back of your hand. You're a team. So you live together, you eat together, you sleep together. You know how that is, the brotherhood.
No, 100%. I think everybody listening certainly.
Oh, absolutely. You guys
understand
have the same thing. I saw it in the Army.
There's no doubt about that. I just,
yeah.
Again, I just have this irrational fear of being stuck in the water somewhere with nobody to come and get me. I mean, even if you give me a raft, it's like, I don't want to end up like Tom Hanks in Castaway, for crying out loud. It's just not my deal.
I understand that, and a lot of people do feel that way. I guess I was born a water baby. I just love to swim.
All right. Like we talked about the Coast Guard cutter Point Spencer, where you ended up next after you finish A school and everything else. You had a lot of different missions on this one, particularly the Coast Guard missions all over the Gulf of Mexico. So,
absolutely.
What are these missions like? Give me some examples.
We were in the yard, which is a maintenance period where the boat's out of the water for the first 30 days I was in there. And I got stationed on the boat at the same time a QM3, which is a quartermaster. He and I hit it off real well. We were best friends from day one. Both of us are big guys, 6'3", he's 6'4", 225 pounds. He was a swimmer with the 72 Munich Olympics. This guy was pretty sharp. We're both the same age. We became fast friends. After we left the yard, about 30 days later, I think this was sometime in March or April of 1980, the Marial boat lift kicked off. Well, here we go. We're underway. We're down in Key West within 19 hours, and we're picking up people coming in from Cuba in some absolutely horrible vessels and weather. And man, it was just hard to describe. We had 91 people that we had to transfer to boat one night onto our boat. It was 6-foot seas. Eric and I were back on the railings. I was handing people to him or throwing people to him as hard as I could to try to get them across the railings without getting them between the boats. We had infants, we had children, we had 90-year-old people. That was a long night. We continued with the operation for about 6 months. They'd let us go home for about 2 weeks to New Orleans to refit and refuel, and then back to New Orleans, or back to Key West. Jimmy Carter was the president at the time. We weren't funded very well. We very seldom had fuel money, but they made us work. They made it work for us. He kept changing his mind on what he wanted to do, either stop them or let them come in, stop them or let them come in.
Right.
So we noticed it about 2 months or 3 months in, we started getting less children and women and started getting more males,
Right.
25 to 35, 40-year-old males. Well, these males started coming in, they were hardcore looking. They had shaved heads, they had tattoos all over the place, and they weren't the nicest guys around. So we kind of got it figured out in our head, and we armed up. We one of the first units that decided we better start carrying our own weapons instead of letting these guys just on our boat. Well, it turned out that Castro had started letting all the prisoners and all the mental health patients as the asylum people out. And that's when we really started getting kind of rough. We were pulling people in, day out. It was a nonstop 18-hour work days. You were lucky to get 4 hours sleep at that. And that was broken sleep.
How do you notify the government of what you're seeing? Does anybody do that?
Well, we had an on-scene coordinator, which would have been Coast Guard Cutter Dallas, which is at the time was the biggest of the the high endurance cutters that the Coast Guard had. She's 378 foot, and she'll run anywhere on the globe. She usually carries a 4-striper, which we call a captain in the Army, an 06. Mm-hmm. So he's in direct control with the district headquarters, which would have been 7th District. 7th District is in coordination with headquarters up in Washington, D.C.
That's kind of crazy to think that that was going on for as long as it was going on.
Oh, absolutely. It was in the news quite a bit, but as we see in a lot of our media coverage, it dies down and something else will break and be more enchanting to watch, I suppose. They knew that the people of the United States weren't real happy about this, so they had to get it shut down sooner or later.
Yeah. Okay.
And by stopping the media coverage on it, that pretty much works. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Tell me the story about the Red Diamond.
The Red Diamond was interesting. She had 731 people on board. So we got her, and
was it a cruise ship? What was it?
No. It was actually the Red Diamond was an old offshore supply boat itself. So these are boats that have been used to supply oil rigs and stuff like that. So we don't know where the Red Diamond come from. She was probably just commandeered from somewhere and used in the Cuban boat lift. You have to remember a lot of these boats were brought in from people that owned them, that were part of the the Cuban community that lived in Miami. So a lot of these people were leaving Miami, going to Cuba, picking up people and coming back. When we found the Red Diamond, she was dead in the water with 700 souls on board, and we had to get her to port.
Okay.
So here we are. I think she was a little over 300 foot, maybe 250 foot. We put a tow line on her and towed her into port with an 82-footer, which was pretty exciting. That's not done too often. Another one of our big tows out at sea was 7 personal watercraft or small watercraft, anything between, say, 30 foot and 20 foot. We had 7 of them on the tow line at one time. It was pretty funny to see. It was like a mother duck, and all her ducklings behind us. The Cuban ops really brought a lot of man's inhumanity to man to me. I also have been to Cuba or Haiti, and that's one place I'll never go back to.
Why?
Oh, Haiti. Well, when I pulled into Port of Haiti, there was dead bodies all over the moorings area. It stunk, and it was just, there's no humanity there. And I don't think there is any today. from my experience, I'll never go back.
Wow. Did you ever find out why they were dead body? I mean, was it just
That was just their nature.
interesting?
Haiti is completely, like probably many other places in the world, completely uncivilized.
Yeah. There may
Yeah,
be
it's
some of that.
rough. It's rough. And I've been to some pretty rough places.
Yeah, I mean, look, it sounds like it already. So the next year of your career involves a lot of drugs, as you say, drugs and
Oh,
more drugs.
drugs after drugs. We hit after the Cuban thing is we hit the we went back to New Orleans and hit the drug trade or started to hit the drug trade pretty hard. We found out after our first big bust after a major bust that the DEA and them, customs and them actually had airplanes up flying around finding out where these people are loading up. And then they track them and they call us to go interdict them. We didn't have that option. We just got lucky if we got lucky. So it was kind of a neat process. Here we go. We get a flash message and let's go get these guys. Well, the first one was the motor vessel Polaris.
Mm-hmm.
We get up alongside her and she's not going to stop. And so then we have to figure out how to stop this vessel. So we use all kinds of different ways to try to stop a vessel. We throw a line in the water to foul the props, which will stop a boat. We use fire hoses to try to wet down the pilot house, try to get water in there. We do anything we can, really, just to get them to stop. Well, they wouldn't stop. District was notified, and district gave us permission, which was highly unusual. In fact, we were told we were the first unit since Prohibition to use disabling fire, which couldn't be true because we used a lot of disabling fire in Vietnam. But beside the point, we opened up. We had two brand new crew members on board. The XO was on leave, my chief engineer was on leave, so we had a skeleton crew. We had to bring in a couple extra new crew members. We put the cook on the 50 caliber, let him shoot it up. Once we made our point, I noticed that I was the lead boating officer at the time, and I noticed that we had 20 some odd people coming out the superstructure, out the pilot house area, carrying suitcases. And I said, what is going on here? I've never had this before. So I looked up the captain. He looked at me and he says, check it good. And I said, sure thing. So me and the prize crew, we jumped on board. We got on board, got the prisoners all stacked up. My two shotgun men are back there, got them in the holding area. And Eric and I lurched, the QM3, and I had to clear the boat. So we went about clearing the boat, clearing the superstructure. Seeing all the bullet holes in this boat that a 50 caliber will make is just amazing. I've never seen a 50 work out like that. I've never seen the results of a 50 working out like that. Clearing a boat is just like clearing a room, like you guys had to do, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have any real training in it, so we kind of had to learn along the way. Kept eating back in my mind. Why were these guys all on the stern with the suitcases? And then it popped in my head, I better get to the engine room. I went to the engine room. Eric and I had to crawl across 50-pound bales of weed to get to the engine room, and there's water in the engine room. And I said, here we go. So I noticed one of the sea strainers, which is a way to cool diesel engines. They draw wall water in, it goes around a heat exchanger and ships it back outside. So that'll keep the diesels cool. Well, they'd open up one of the sea strainers, which lets the wall water in. It's a 12-inch pipe. Well, they weren't really thinking about it, I suppose, or they wanted us to save the boat. I'm not sure which, but they left everything there for me to put it back together. Eric and I quickly got it back together, got the water stopped, and got the boat pumping out. That's when we went into the main hole, and that's when we discovered we had more weed than I'd ever seen in my life.
Oh, wow.
It ended up being in excess of, I think it was 110 pounds, 110 tons. And that was solid gold Colombian marijuana. So we ended up with 23 prisoners and 110 tons that trip. The next trip was kind of a little strange too. The next one was about a month later. It was a Saturday. We were in what they call Charlie, which would have been a maintenance period. The crew again is all scattered throughout. They're not really on board. Nobody's on board but the duty guy, and I happened to be the duty guy that day. I got the call from the old man. He said, "Get the crew together. We got to run." And I said, "Well, I'll get whoever I can get together." We got whoever we could get together on the crew, which made it about 8 of us. And we got on down to what they call the Mississippi Gulf Outlet, which is a straight ditch that runs from New Orleans proper into the Gulf of Mexico. And we set up down there at the pass. When we set up, we usually set up out in the bush or out in the swamp, hidden by a tree or something like that, using night scopes and radar to see who's coming in and out. Well, after I'd changed watch and I had gone off to bed, one of the new kids that wasn't real familiar with our operation said, "Let this boat go by in the middle of the night." Next morning, I get up and we get ready to go back to New Orleans. Ops is normal. Let's go back home. It's Sunday. We'll be home by lunchtime. Everything's cool. Let's get. So we're heading up the ditch. Eric and I've got the con. He's the OD and I'm the engineer of the watch. And we notice about a 235-foot freighter, an inland freighter, sitting up on the right-hand side of the ditch. It's stuck. It's in the water. It's aground. Well, they've got 15, 16 little brown people standing on the back end of it, showing a Norwegian flag. So I know something's not right with that. And we was about 100 yards away, and I could smell the weed. So we jump it. We get on board it. I've got another 45 tons. So within a month and a half, I had 155 tons.
That's insane.
I know. It was absolutely insane. I guess the cartels decided then they were losing too much money, and they're not going to send their weed that away. And they shipped it all, land operations shipped it over to the border side of Texas and Arizona and New Mexico. So we stopped the weed coming into the Gulf of Mexico.
At one point, you had a fire on board, which sounds rather scary.
Yeah, that was kind of traumatizing. We, as a prize crew of the Point Spencer, they decided, well, we're going to give you guys a brand new boat. It was a 110-foot surface effects ship that was on loan to us by the Navy. She was a fast boat. She was a catamaran hull, which means she had two holes with a space in between. Well, the space in between had a forward skirt, or a rubber skirt, and a forward or a half skirt that went between the two sponsons. Am I making sense?
Yes.
You know what a catamaran is?
I know what one. I've been on one on a trip to Mexico, but
there you go. There you go. I don't care if they're 12 foot or if they're 200 foot.
Okay.
It's a catamaran hull. So this thing had 44-inch diameter fans run by two V8 Detroit diesels. This thing would lift up on a bubble of air, and she would ride on top of the water. She was 25 knots and 20-foot seas. That's a ride. That's a roller coaster for everybody. Well, one night I was in the rack. I had just come off watch about an hour before. Our watches usually ran it's a 4-hour watch, 4 on, 8 off, unless you had less crew or more crew. You had to adjust your watches. I had just hit the rack and the general alarm went off. And the engine room door was right next to my berthing area. The first thing an engineer is going to do when something like that happens, he's going to come out and he's going to check the metal door securing the engine room with the back of his palm of his hand or the back of his hand to make sure that's not where the heat's coming from. But I felt the heat. I knew we had problems. I got topside to my station, to my general quarter station, which is number 1 fireman. So I got into my OBA, which is oxygen breathing apparatus, an old school thing. Got the fire hose, and me and Lurch went into the engine room and had molten aluminum just melting on top of us. We don't have fire gear. We're down there in our uniforms, no hard hats or anything. I'm still in a pair of topsiders. But we got the fire out, and that's what mattered. Then we had to figure out how to get home. So we were about I think 20 miles off the Mexican coast. We got one main diesel started and we started limping home. It was a 3-day trip home. Once we got her home, Bell Halters, the boat that built the company that built the boat, they took the boat back under control, rebuilt her in 3 weeks. We got some needed time off and then back underway. The Coast Guard Dorado was mainly a research and development, or if we wanted to buy a boat. And we used it on all platforms, all search and rescue, all law enforcement, anything that the Coast Guard wanted to try this boat on, we used it. So we spent an inordinate amount of time underway, away from family and friends.
Let me ask you, you've been now in the Coast Guard for 3 years, a little over 3 years at this point in time.
Right. I was coming up on my reenlistment at that time.
I was going to say, you've done all this stuff and you've seen some morbid things and everything else. I mean, what are you thinking big picture wise? I mean, are you in love with it right now, or this is more than you bargained for? Or
man, I'll tell you right now, if they told me they needed me to come back, I'd be there in a minute. If I could just handle the telephone for them, I'd be happy. No, there was a unit there at New Orleans called Captain of the Port, which is another completely different kind of entity of the Coast Guard. It's a port security unit. They handle all security within the ports and the coastlines of the United States. They handle pollution investigations, chemical spills, drug busts, search and rescue, anything you can think of the Coast Guard does, they handle it. And I wanted to go off to a school called Marine Environmental Protection Petty Officers Course. And the only way to do that was get stationed on there. So when my enlistment time came up, Coast Guard needed me. They were giving out big bonuses, and my rating was actually the top bonus at the time. And I took a chance. I said, yeah, I'll take that bonus, but I want to go to Captain of the Port, and I want to go to this school because I want to learn what it's like to be a pollution investigator and hazmat man. They said, no problem. They sent me off to school. Well, that 4-year experience was more schools than I'd ever seen in my life. I'd been to Texas A&M firefighting school, Chevron rig firefighting school, hazardous materials schools from the EPA to Texas A&M to Dillard University to all kinds of schools, explosive schools out in Concord, California, just all the time. Education, while maintaining the job at the time. About my 3rd year into that, now I'm going to get to a fun story, or what I thought was a fun story. I guess they decided I'd been underway and kind of wilded out a little bit, and they kind of needed to pulse me up because I was going to be dealing with the public and let's say members of industry. All refinery presidents and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I wasn't worried about all that. I wanted to get in and get to the meat of it, but they kind of gave me a little lack job. They said, look, we're going to put you with, they put me with a captain. And I was his vice commander. So in 1984 come in, they had the World's Fair. And I was chosen to be the vice commander as an E4 of the World's Fair, Coast Guard unit, World's Fair. So with that, I had an office up at the World's Fair. I got to do all the scheduling for the Coast Guard events, which every night I had to have a patrol vessel on board. I had to have 3 patrols up there 3 times a day. But every night at 10 o'clock, I had to have a vessel up there for the fireworks show. So that was a lot of fun. I also got to be the second man on the Coast Guard Vice President Protection Unit when Vice President George Bush Sr. came to town. So that was an experience. I got to work with all these different agencies, the special or the Secret Service and Navy SEALs and all that kind of stuff. That was quite eye-opening. That was a good little 6-month tour.
You also worked in the Hurricane Operations Center at one point.
Well, see, now this is after I'd been there about 3 years. they put me in the operations center. I'd pretty much gone through all the departments that I needed to go through and got trained up on all the different aspects of captain of the port. And I was a good student at it. So they decided, well, let's move him into the operations center. We're going to try something different. We're going to merge the search and rescue side and the port security side together. So we're going to have a SAR man in there, and we're going to have port security, which I represented the port security side. We operated, a bank of telephones, had a radio man, a radio room. We had an OD, which was an officer, which is unusual in the Coast Guard because we didn't really get, and this is a very big unit, we didn't see very many officers.
Right.
And this was a large unit. So, yeah, we had our share of officers. So that was Hurricane 1. I had had a lot of experience in the operations center by then and never knew what was going to expect, what was going to happen in that 12-hour shift. We worked 12 hours on, 12 hours off, 2 days on, 2 days off with sliding weekends. Obviously it was 12 a.m. to 12 midnight. And on your next time, you was 12 midnight to 12 a.m. Well, I'd come in that day, it was 12 a.m., Hurricane 1's heading for New Orleans. I have to worry about my family. I've got a family out in St. Bernard Parish, Chalmette, which is a little bedroom community of New Orleans. Her family all lives there. So I'm worried about them, and I start the phone start ringing. I think I logged over 400 phone calls that day, from crazy to crazier to crazier. I had 20 Filipino crew members in the water down at the mouth of the pass, which is where the Mississippi River enters the Gulf of Mexico. I had all spills everywhere. My search and rescue guy had all kinds of searches going on at the same time, which I'm having to help him with, and he's having to help me do my stuff. We were busy. Then we had a Russian decided he was not going to be a Russian anymore. He wanted to be an American and jumped off the damn boat in the middle of the river. And the Border Patrol actually found the guy walking down the levee. And that agent decided, well, he's not coming here. We're going to put him back on board. Well, you don't do that. Not with a Russian national. If a Russian national decides he wants amnesty, you're going to give it to him no matter what, especially if he jumps off a cargo boat in the middle of the Mississippi River. So that brought the State Department in. The State Department wanted us to get ready to board. And I said, well, we don't have the way of boarding that boat. We didn't have the crews that would be able to do it safely. I said, you're going to have to think of some other way. And he said, okay, I'll get back to you. I notified the OD, and the OD was too busy, really worried about the State Department at the time. I was hoping the State Department would forget us and it'd all be over with because I had people in the water. I had to get them out of the water. Right. But it didn't happen. Reagan was president, and Reagan wanted everybody he could get. So they sent in some special ops guys. We never saw them. And well, let's just say he was rescued.
Okay. After this, you moved to Point Roberts, Mayport, Florida.
The Point Roberts. This was my last unit. And,
right.
And I hate to say, probably sadly, my worst.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing that stuck out to me about this duty station for you is the Challenger case, which, again, referring to the Space Shuttle Challenger. I mean, look, it's one of the most seminal moments of my entire childhood, right? I mean, like literally
Absolutely.
January 28th, 1986. I remember it vividly. They had wheeled the TVs into our classroom, and we stopped.
Absolutely.
We were watching the space shuttle take off. There was a teacher on board. And by the way, there's a great side note. There's a great Netflix documentary on what went wrong with the Challenger and how it was completely botched by NASA and every scientist along the way. It was a launch that should have never happened. But
there's a lot of PR things that were said that should never have been said and done.
Yeah.
I was sitting in the ops room.
I was going to say, so what's your role here?
Well, I was sitting in the ops room at Captain of the Port New Orleans. I'd already had my orders to the Point Roberts and was due to report on board Monday. Well, this was on the 28th. This thing happened, and I saw the boat. I saw the Point Spencer coming in with debris on her into the Cape on the nose. And one of the guys said, "Hey, there's your next unit." And I popped up and I looked at her, and she you could tell she'd been underway for quite a bit. She was dirty. She just looked disheveled. And, when I just said that it was probably the worst unit I was on, no, it just needed some help. And I think that's one reason, being that I had already been on 282 footers, that they decided that I'd probably be a good crew member and could help the boat get back into shape. So they sent me. Once I got on board, the crew was a little different than what I was used to. They were dealing with Challenger mainly. They didn't do too many law enforcement or search and rescue. They mainly dealt with whenever the Challenger needed security. They were the ones that were up and running on it.
As far as when you say needed security, are you talking about them trying to recover pieces of the shuttle in the Atlantic?
Well, their overall job was one of the primary missions was to provide security for all shuttle operations. Okay. So anytime a shuttle got launched, then they were there in case something like when the Challenger blew up, if there was any case of any hope of search and rescue, that would be on scene. So with that being said, yeah, we did run some search and rescue cases. I think we spent about 6 weeks out there on the Challenger until it died out of the news. We had a lot of rough weather, a lot of crazy calls. We had chicken bones on the beach one time, and God bless Joe Civilian, but he thought there was people bones, and I had lots of small boat, 6-foot seas. Our little small boat was nothing but 14 foot long, little small bitty thing, and had to put it on the beach and go find these chicken bones and, put them in a plastic bag and bring them back to the boat and tell the people that found them, you did a good job. Thank you for America and that kind of stuff. But I realized they was just bleached up chicken bones somebody had a picnic on the beach with. So yeah, we deal with some crazy stuff out there.
Also, you had your last search and rescue mission at this assignment, right?
Well, I was having problems.
Meaning what?
PTSD problems. Okay. I didn't realize at the time. Nobody talked about PTSD.
Sure.
I mean, you heard snippets about it, but it was way before. This was 1988. Mm-hmm. This is, a rough period. We get underway. We got this call. I got to go back to the boat a little bit. The boat hadn't been in the yard in a long time. She was falling apart. And as an engineer, that really stressed me out. They wouldn't give us time to put the boat in the yard. We had to be underway too much. So that was just, Coast Guard didn't have the money, I suppose. And we were building new 87-foot Coast Guard patrol boats to take their place at the time, 110 foot. So we got this call. It was off the shoreline, Carolinas, and it was a blow boat. When I say a blow boat, coasties will understand what I'm saying. Blow boat is a sailboat. Sailboats are the disdain of the Coast Guard. They're the hardest things to tow, especially when you're in rough seas. So we're running extremely, extremely rough seas at night, the largest I'd ever seen. And I'd been in 45-foot seas beforehand. So we're estimating 60-foot seas. This boat's about 55 foot. She had 5 members on board, and we had to hook tow to it because she was dead in the water. She was DIW. Well, we finally got, it's like watching a ballet crew out there with our crew members out there trying to get the line over to that other boat in that kind of seas. We finally got her hooked up. We had to hook it up around the mast of the boat, center of the boat, to be able to get her to pull. We got her in. We got some time off. We took crew rest, take 24 hours before we headed back to home port. And I had my first sleepwalking experience. Well, I knew, I'd been having nightmares and stuff like that, and I knew something wasn't right. So we got back, and I told the captain, I said, Skipper, I got problems. I don't know what it is. He said, okay, we'll get you over to the Navy base, which is in Mayport, Florida. Coasties and Navy people did not get along. The Marines and the Coast Guard, we love each other. I miss you about I got to tell you one important one about the motor vessel, Wilson Harbor, which was during the Cuban operation. We got a call the motor vessel Wilson Harbor sinking and has 8 POB on board. We get there and it's 8 Marines. Don't ask me how they got this boat. It's a 38-foot Hatteras, a $2 million yacht. And these guys have never been on a boat in their lives. You ever seen crabs trying to get out of a crab basket?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what those 8 Marines were trying to do, my crew. And I wasn't having it. I got on board. I told them to chill out, at ease. We're going to do this right. We're going to do it the Coast Guard way. And we got them on board. Those guys were funny. They were really glad we showed up that night. But let's go back to Mayport. They sent me to a Navy doctor, to a Navy psychiatrist, which didn't speak English very well. He was Filipino. I don't speak Filipino very well. Well, the next thing I know, I got separation orders for being a sleepwalker. I said, huh? Really? Well, that made me mad. I got called from district legal and they said, look, we can fight this and we can probably go to medical with it. And I said, no. I said, y'all done made me mad now. I said, do what you got to do. And I went back to Mayport. Mayport put me on the beach there at the station. And I waited for my time out. About 6 weeks later, I got orders to go ahead and get out. I got out. I was miserable. I felt like I failed. I didn't understand. My wife couldn't understand. My in-laws couldn't understand. I started drinking. And as you see the Coors Light behind me, that's just a memento. I started drinking. I drank too heavily. It just got too big. Well, I ended up getting divorced. I lost my family. I decided I'm going to see how the other side of the law lives. Don't ask me why. I was crazy at the time, drinking too much. And I just went and decided to be homeless, kind of, and do whatever I had to do to make amends, to make money, just worked as a shrimper, worked digging oysters, doing the whole, I guess, Forrest Gump thing, actually. I got really bad off, and my father and them had retired from the Army, and he was teaching the Patriot missile system up there at Fort Bliss. And after that, they moved back to Arkansas, their home state. My father come down and got me because he knew I was in bad shape. He and my uncle, one of my great uncles, Army vet himself, they took me to the VA. The VA treated me for alcoholism, and I got out. The PTSD was never mentioned. I just figured, okay, I'll be okay. Well, that didn't solve my problems. I continued to drink, and I moved back to New Orleans because I was ashamed. I couldn't bring that to my parents. Went back to New Orleans hoping to get some more help, and decided to go back to the VA and ask for more help. They again put me in another alcohol rehab, but I ran across a psych who talked to me and interviewed me. And it wasn't 30 days later, I started getting disability payments, which at the time were, I think, 40%.
Wow.
So that helped out money-wise a little ways. Then I had to learn the VA system and had to go through, I went through 2 inpatient PTSD programs up in North Little Rock, Arkansas, which at the time, if anybody out there needs some help with PTSD, go to North Little Rock. There's a doctor named Kimball. He'll save your life, I guarantee it. He'll teach you what you got to do to make yourself straight and narrow, or make yourself worthy again, I guess you want to say. I stopped drinking. I moved in a little small place on a beautiful federal park called Greer's Ferry, Arkansas, and I live out in the woods. It's me and my 2 dogs. I just have a good time.
What is
kind of isolated?
No, listen. I mean, of all the stories you told, and they're incredible to hear. I mean, I'm just I was generally unaware of a lot of this stuff. But when in reference to your PTSD, are there ones that stick out more than others? Is this like a general thing? I mean, where are you now with all that you went through?
Now, I'm 66 years old, and it's been a lot of years. But I was sitting in a chair just about 4 days ago, and something come across the TV. It was involved a young girl. She was on the news, and she had been found dead. And all of a sudden, I saw the girl, the first SAR station. I saw the first girl I picked up, and it was like her head was right there. I saw her like it was that day. I smelled that day. It brought every memory I had of that day right to me right then and there, and I had to shake myself out of it. So it's still today, I still have to take a medication to help me sleep at night. Nothing that I won't take anything that's addictive.
Right.
I take what they call trazodone, which is a non-addictive sedative, and that makes me sleep at night. So I get good 6 hours sleep every night, and that makes a big difference. That and being sober sure does help.
Yeah.
I'd like to go to one little small story about the VA.
Go ahead.
You hear a lot of people gripe and bitch and moan about the VA. The VA actually saved my life twice. And yes, you might have to fight once in a while. You might have to get angry once in a while. But the majority of those men and women that work at the VA are also veterans. That we all need to learn and live with. These guys have been there where you've been. They do still help, and they help you. Well, I learned in 2015 that I had lung cancer. And the doctor was a doctor from UMAS, which is a teaching hospital associated with the Little Rock VA. He was the best in the state. He came in and says, I was weighing 277 pounds. He said, you're big. I'm kind of scared. I don't think this is going to work. I said, we're going to try it. I'm a survivor. Let's do it. So they cut me open. I spent 26 days in intensive care, and I've been cancer-free since.
Wow.
It's 7 years now.
That's amazing.
Yeah, 7 years now. And I still get up and walk around and do what I want to do.
No, that's a great smile. I love it. That's
yeah,
amazing to hear.
it just makes me happy. I've lived a charmed, beautiful, wonderful life. I'd like to go back to my Army childhood in a moment if I could. My father spent 26 years in the Army. He retired as a warrant officer with the Hawk missile system. So I got to travel. I spent 7 years in Germany. Like I said, started kindergarten during the Cuban Missile Crisis on the East German border, and then finished high school at the Fulda Gap on the East German border. So that was quite interesting. Living in the high school dormitory, going to school on Sunday afternoon and coming home on Friday evening was also interesting. We had 86 kids there, males and females, and from all over Europe, activities Europe, Russia, Norway, anywhere you could think of, these kids were there, and we all were one big happy family. And still today, keep together. We still talk to each other after all these years.
What is the most misunderstood thing about the Coast Guard, in your opinion?
Well, people always say it's not a military service, and it's not. It is, but it's not. It's structured like a military service. I think that's for pay grades and such.
Right.
Because I was an E4 doing an 06 job, so how do you say it's in the military? Many a times an E4 in the Coast Guard, you might say E4 Mafia, but many times an E4 in the Coast Guard got a $3 million boat and a 2-man crew, and he's responsible for that boat, that crew, and the lives that he's saving. That's a big responsibility for an E4.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Coast Guard when I was at the time, I was part of the Department of Transportation. Now it's under the headlines of the Department of Homeland Security. If we go to war, then it's Department of Navy. Now, we've been in the Iraqi war for 20 some odd years now, and the Coast Guard does have a contingent there. They do boardings, they do smuggling activities, they do protection services, they do quite a bit of work. We're called the uniform of the services, and that's the reason, because you don't see us very often. Anytime I went onto a Air Force or Army or Navy base or Marine base even, in uniform, everybody just kind of gawked at you and said, who are you? What do you do?
That's kind of funny.
We're coasties.
What was the best? Go ahead.
When I went in, there was 36,000 active duty Coast Guard people. Today, there's 45,000 active duty Coast Guard people, which is smaller than the New York Police Department.
That's insane. That is
Isn't
a frame
it?
of reference
Isn't it?
that I was not even prepared to hear.
Absolutely.
What was your favorite part about like your favorite mission set, I guess, or your favorite part about the Coast Guard? Was it the search and rescue stuff? Was it the drug bust, or was it something different?
Most gratifying was the search and rescue. There's nothing like seeing a human that you reach into and you pull him out of the water because he's been in the water for so long and he thinks he's going to die that whole time he's in that water. But when I reach my hand out and Eric reaches his hand out and we hoist that man or that woman or that child onto our boat and tell them you're safe, we're going home. That right there, their eyes tell you everything. The funnest part had to be the boardings, had to be the LE stuff, had to be chasing the dope runners, had to be the operations that I got involved with the port security unit there in New Orleans, because that was a lot of. We worked with a lot of agencies, did a lot of crazy stuff, did a lot of surveillance, searched a lot of docks, searched a lot of wars, worked, like I said, with a lot of different police agencies. It was quite interesting work, but not as rewarding as the search and rescue. The search and rescue makes you feel good.
If you bump into an 18-year-old kid who tells you, "Hey, I'm thinking about going into the service," what would your pitch to him be to sign up for the Coast Guard?
I am a active duty Coast Guard recruiter. How's that?
Oh,
I'm not
wow.
getting paid for it. I'm not getting paid for it. If you can pass the test, go. Do it. Absolutely. If you want to be in the action 24 hours a day, 365 days a week or a year for your whole 20 years, join the Coast Guard. All there is to it. Bottom line. I saw action from the day I went in or the day I graduated from boot camp to the day I got out. There was no breaks in between other than the World's Fair for 6 months.
It's insane.
So it's like one giant deployment.
Yeah, I mean that's what it sounds like. Again,
Absolutely.
It's an existence that I was, thoroughly unaware of to the level that you guys had to do this stuff.
Might help you. Here's another might help you. Think of you're from Long Island. Think about your fire departments. Mm-hmm. Think about the crew that's on your fire department. You have one crew on and they're on for 2 days and then they're off for 2 days. You have another crew come in. We work the same way.
Yeah.
Same way.
Listen, I thank you so much. Like, honestly, I've learned a lot. I feel I have a much greater appreciation for the Coast Guard than I did an hour ago when we started talking and understanding this whole thing. And, for the audience, full disclosure, thank you for reaching out to us to tell your story. We always love it when guests do that, and I certainly appreciate you doing it. I mean, again, I'll peel back the curtains for the audience. Like, I had to call Jim ahead of time. Like, Jim, I don't know what you're going to tell me. Like, I have no idea what the Coast Guard does. So let's talk a little bit so I can understand what we're talking about here. But I hope the audience loved it. I know I did. I'm certainly smarter now than I was before, and it's been great talking to you.
Mark, I want to thank you for your service, and you guys that gone off to the sandbox, y'all are great, fantastic. Some of the things you've dealt with was just astronomical, and I'm with you, brother. Anytime you need some help or anything like that, holler, we'll help you out. There's a lot of us old guys around that can help.
No, again, thank you
the
for
Coast
your
Guard
service.
was established in 1790.
Mm-hmm.
So we are the oldest seagoing service in the United States.
That is correct. Second branch of the military that was established right after the Army. So
absolutely,
we are side by side. Well, look, again, it's been great getting to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I hope we get some people who say, "I want to go to the Coast Guard now." All right, we'll get that number bigger than the New York City Police Force sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you better study up. You better learn what you got to learn to get into the Coast Guard, because the test's not that easy, but it's a good way to do your life.
Congratulations on beating cancer. Congratulations on remaining sober.
Sir.
These are great things for you. Wish you nothing but continued success, continued health. And certainly, Jim Morphew, thank you for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you much, Mark. Have a good day.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zinno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.